Good morning and welcome to another video cast from Hendy Consulting, the specialist management consulting firm to the $125 billion FPD display industry. And today, actually, I want to talk a little bit about innovation in China in the display industry and the different strategies of some of the top Chinese players. And actually, this is one of the more revealing of my recent research pieces. I actually spent some time today putting together a profile based on interviews and or annual reports or websites of the different innovation positions for the different leading Chinese firms. And actually one of the insights, which is a new deal between HKC and JDI, which is seems to be at the sort of MOU phase, moving towards a final agreement, I think has the real scope to be potentially quite important. But I'd like to actually talk about the Chinese top tier and second tier players and their innovation agendas, and then also begin to talk a little bit about my thoughts about the role of display innovation in China. And I apologise for Heathrow Airport, which is sending planes over my head today. So this was the review of the top players in the display industry by revenue, and as you can see, the two Chinese here are BOE and China Star, and in 2022 had revenues of 23.6 billion and 9.8 billion, so put together a little over 30 billion of the total industry revenue. So about a quarter, a little over a quarter, comes from the top two Chinese. And yet the second tier we're also going to discuss today includes companies like Visionox, Tianma and HKC. Those are the three second tier chess pieces, as I've called them, and I will refer you to other talks that I've done on LinkedIn talking about their strategies in particular. But today I'm really digging deep into what I can find on their innovation agendas, and then I want to make some sort of overarching points of view on how successful I think the Chinese are going to be. So this is my innovation leadership board, really, and it's my own point of view on the levels of innovation in the display industry, from basically market entry at the bottom, where you could come into the market. If you can buy the equipment, you can pretty much make a standard amorphous silicon LCD. If you can hire the engineers and get a few Ronin engineers to come from somewhere else, perhaps a few senior hires, if you spend 5 years, you can get to a decent LCD business, such as it is with the profitability that it is, within a few years. Levels 2 and 3 are then actually standard and flex OLED, and then we get into the higher echelons of the innovation scheme of the whole industry, where really the ability at Oxide and LTPO is sort of differentiating. It is a completely different semiconductor and has a very different device physics, so has typically been seen as I think a harder technology to pull off. And then where the two Koreans are right at the top, LGD and SDC, where they are fully capable of compete and display ecosystem innovation. Now the Chinese we're going to talk about are the ones in red shown here. So BOE and China Star, which is CSOT shown here, are the two big leaders in China, with BOE quite substantially the bigger brother in terms of both capacity and revenue. The second tier players in China are then Visionox, which I always show as VX, Tianma, which is a $4 billion small medium player, mostly a very good specialist firm, very well managed, and HKC, which is a relatively new large panel monitors and TV focused business that's really emerged onto the scene over the last 5 years. And those to me are the top Chinese 5. And what we're going to talk about is, where is their display innovation going, and do I believe that then they have the capability to catapult further up this slide? So really they're going, all of them are going from sort of either level 1 to level 2.5, and with BOE arguably it's probably level 3. China Star desperately making some moves towards levels 4 and 5 with its work on inkjet print OLED, and we want to comment about the innovation agendas across all of them. So let's go one by one. Of course, we have to start with talking about BOE, and actually reading their annual report, which is now great and is in English. You can actually, they are now talking about a 1+4+N+ ecosystem strategy. Wow, that's a mouthful, but essentially comes down to display technology is at the heart, but then they have 4 downstream businesses where they're trying systems level plays. and they also then think that they may have a future end businesses in IoT, other domains later, and it's through expansion into ecosystems that they're going to pursue this strategy. So this is a new way of describing the strategy of BOE before, but I think we'll see as we turn to their R&D agenda that actually it's driving quite a lot of breadth in terms of what they're spending their time on. So the BOE 2022 annual report actually lists 33 different programs. And actually here we've tried to, let me move this. I've actually tried to summarize them with a bit of a sense on whether they're in mass production, that's what MP stands for, whether they're with a client for sort of prototyping and trials, or whether they're still in R&D. And if you get a sense, and let's read down a few of them, right? So the Taishan project is for a wide color gamut, high contrast LCD, and is in mass production. Projector light engine, high refresh rate LCDs, some hardcore oxide development, but that's still in R&D. Privacy viewing technology, which they call peep proof, but I mean I think many people have tried variants of that technology at different times, which is also in R&D. The OLED Q9 stack, which they want to improve the efficiency of the stack. 1 Hertz low temp polyoxide, which is still in sort of trialing phase. A 1.5mm infolding OLED display. Work on mini-LED TVs. And then the second page is pretty much mostly all system-related stuff. So they go through student and student smart cards, banking systems, park kiosks, tiling of displays, and then some of those things which are sort of biometrics and the use of display glass for other markets, such as smart roofs, for automotive, smart windows, and things like that. So it's quite a broad agenda. But the thing I would say is that I would have expected BOE to have a much deeper, hardcore display technology around future LTPS, LTPO, OLED materials, even micro LED, and a range oxide development, hardcore oxide development. I would have expected them to have a large panel emissive development that's not here. Also, not a huge emphasis on mini LED and micro LED, although they are doing quite a lot of work. So it's interesting what has made their annual report in terms of the 33 actual programs that they actually talk about. I missed one here. There are 2 backlight related programs. But it's really interesting to me that nothing makes me feel that there's something really groundbreaking in this agenda. Now, when you start talking about this, and this comes from a interview with Zheng Zhao, who's the CEO of China Star, then you get a very different sense. I mean, this is a interview write-up, and of course he's picking proprietary products, but the first one he mentions is the world's first 65-inch 8K inkjet printed foldable OLED display. Well, okay, now you're talking about really the bleeding edge. You're talking about being at the same level as LGD. He's also talking about high mobility oxide. Now, I don't know what his definition of high mobility oxide is, but just the sense I get from some of this, I mean, again, talking about very high resolution VR based on LTPO at 1500 dpi. Again, it's much more, this, I wouldn't have been surprised if I'd seen this sort of discussion from either STC or LGD. And I guess that is in line with my sense of China Star, is that they are taking more ballsy innovation bets than BOE, pushing harder, aiming for new technology. And then also I really like this part. They talk about they're going to invest 200 million a year over 5 years, this total of $1 billion in what they call the Sunrise Plan, where they're going to plough money into innovation centres, academia research partnerships, and then new materials, equipment and technologies. I mean, that's just sounding like STC. I mean, that's sounding like that they're going to pursue innovation through equipment and materials as well as through their own plan. I mean, it feels like a weighty agenda of thinking through how do you get an ecosystem to work with you to pull off a higher level of innovation. So frankly, this tone excited me much more than the way that BOE describes its innovations. Now, the next thing, and I hadn't realised that this was actually in the offings, is an announcement that actually JDI and HKC are negotiating a long-term agreement to work together. And I think that is amazing. JDI has really deep technology, particularly since they pulled back the R&D people out of JOLED back inside them. And it's not surprising they'd work with HKC. Both firms, however, are a little bit fragile in terms of finances. HKC just has very large amounts of capacity, but JDI is the technology capability that really could make something really special out of this. And I would be really fascinated to try and think through, and maybe I will, the merger integration plan, or what is it that would be under the scope of such an agreement between JDI and HKC that really could substantively transfer technology and make a real success of this. And they say they want to be the world leader in automotive, VR and monitors. And that's a sort of, they don't feel like normal bedfellows. Those are sort of distinct markets. JDI has always been an automotive leader, so that's fine. HKC is a monitor leader, that's also fine. But it's not quite sure to me how all of this will fit together in terms of a really solid corporate strategy. But it's definitely exciting. I just wonder how they're going to pull this off and what elements are actually going to be in the collaboration. Now, one of them is this ELEAP technology, which is, as far as I understand it, the use of lithography instead of fine metal masks to try and define larger aperture ratios for OLED displays based on work that Applied Materials had done. And indeed, there was a published patent from Applied Materials that Omdia very nicely put in the public domain for all of us. But I mean, I've done some thinking before in the past on the use of lithography and OLED materials. Typically they don't go together very well, very easily technically, but maybe JDI is the sort of company that might have pulled off something like this. So I'm fascinated to see whether JDI now, with a mixture of inkjet printing capability from JOLED and ELEAP, can do something really special with HKC, and whether there's just a really big technology mismatch between one and the other, right? I mean, JDI's pretty high up on the innovation spectrum, and HKC is pretty much back at level 1. And so I think the people and culture and working together challenges of something like this would be really quite high, but it's fascinating to think about nevertheless. And as I said, this is the one slide where Omdia put something from Applied Materials in the public domain with a process flow, which is essentially a sort of litho and CVD based process instead of using evaporation and fine metal masks. Now we move on to Tianma, and Tianma has always been, for me, one of the darling children. I always think they're an incredibly well managed $4 billion small medium display player. They're actually going in the opposite direction and heading towards the others by becoming diversified, by building a large panel fab, which always confused me because I would have told them to stick to their knitting. But then I'm interested by the move. So they're moving into oxide technology through this. They're moving into standard IT markets, but I guess they'll want to do it with a little bit of flair. So they are talking about low power consumption, high refresh rate and narrow border. So I guess they want to live in the slightly premium IT markets. But how they pull this off will be interesting to me, and I'm sort of interested in why they didn't talk about more detailed innovation in their base business, because they really are quite a capable player. Now, Visionox, if you look at what they report on their own website, all the innovations are the sort of things you might expect SDC to talk about. So really it's like a high-speed copycat strategy of all the innovations that for value add that SDC is thinking about for OLED smartphones and flexibles and foldables. But from what I hear from companies that I have as clients, Visionox is a very decent firm to work with in terms of co-innovation and co-development of new technology. So clearly they do have a capability at this. And while they're distinctly smaller, I rate Visionox also quite highly. And here we have the second one. And you can see all the themes here are the ones that you might expect to see also listed by SDC. So it's although the scope and domain space is much smaller than SDC, because SDC's worldview is really about expansion into automotive and into OLED for large format displays. So then what I wanted to do is give a summary of that. I mean, it was interesting for me to go back and in 2023 look in real detail on the innovation agendas on the top 5 Chinese, right? It's not something I do very often. And I was actually really surprised. So the BOE 33 projects, frankly, I was a little disappointed by. There's a lot of work going on, but it's not clear that it's really focused on mega change projects or things that are on the bleeding edge. Maybe what they choose to report in their annual report is not everything, and there may be some deeper stuff, but it doesn't feel like somebody's doing a portfolio review of the R&D and really thinking about what is needed to drive the business forward in terms of the key breakthroughs and the links between them. Whereas the China Star stuff felt more of R&D stretch, right? I mean, they're talking about 65-inch foldable, rollable OLED through inkjet printing. I mean, that really is, compounding several major technologies on top of each other. And I love their idea of their Sunrise program to start trying to think about materials and equipment innovations too. I mean, it's the right way of thinking about innovation in the display industry. HKC then, I'm fascinated by this potential tie-up between JDI and HKC. I think the merger integration line, it's not a merger, but it's a collaboration. The collaboration plan here and the culture management and pulling all of this together, that will be absolutely critical. Visionox then, I mean, I just think that that's almost a close-on copycat of SDC's value-added strategy, but more narrowly focused on smartphone. But then I've heard from others that Visionox is quite a capable player, and so maybe they'll pull off some of this stuff. Finally, Tenma then is worth talking about only because the new fab TM19 is going to bring large panel capabilities, but they seem to want to be at the premium end of the large panel space. And it'll be interesting to see how they go forward. And let's stay here one more second. So the question is do I believe that these Chinese innovations could be as successful as the ones from Korea? And I guess the question here is, how do you deploy an ecosystem around you to make innovation more successful? And I like the models either of HKC and China Star, frankly. The China Star model is to put down its own ecosystem, including partnerships for equipment and materials, to try and pull off bleeding edge projects. And while it's an in-house led strategy, this idea of setting up its own ecosystem is something I believe in very much. The HKC model is harnessing innovation from Japan, and there certainly still is, right? I mean, I was disappointed at the lack of real depth of the relationship between Innolux and Sharp, which again could have been world-breaking but wasn't. And so I guess the question here again for HKC and JDI is, can they really put together a collaboration agreement, and will the Japanese actually be happy to transfer technology so that they can both jointly benefit? And that human side of it is going to be the real challenge. So are these innovation strategies as good as the LGD and SDC ones? I think my summary so far is I quite like both the China Star and the HKC strategy, and I'd like to see BOE take some more substantive, hardcore R&D bets and risks, and then, yeah, that's my feeling. So fine, I would like to talk a little bit finally before we close on my business and the difference between management consulting, which is what we do, and market research. I mean, if you want to go and find out what the pricing of a display is today, or what are the trends in foldables, or what future fabs are going to be planned, then I would tell you, go buy a off-the-shelf market research report. They are great from DSCC, they are great from Omdia, and the micro-LED coverage at Yole is also world-class. And so any of those I would advocate. They have different strengths in different places, but I would advocate is a very good bet. But if your question is different, I mean, if your question is how do we compete, or is the technology that I have any good, or how do I set up a joint development agreement with the display industry so that I get my portion of fair value, or should I think about building a fab, and if so, what type of fab, and how would I set it up, how would I mitigate risk, and when should I do it? Or how can I grow my business and position it for success? Then all of these questions are the one which day to day we take on all the time. Over projects and over retainers, we can work with you. Other than the US, where we don't go, we can come and visit you in person, and we work with your team to improve the competitiveness of your business. And that's why management consulting is different from market research. And we have covered, however, and this is a short list, but it's actually, we've gone beyond that recently. We've done an awful lot of work in micro LED also recently, as that's the new poster child. But we cover a broad range of functional areas, and we work with your team to help your business succeed. And that's a little different from buying a market research report. Anyway, if there's any of this is interesting, then please drop me a note back by clicking LinkedIn message and dropping me a note back with your thoughts. I'm really fascinated by how the Chinese innovation agenda is changing, and specifically as part of that now, which models are going to be the most successful. My sense of it is BOE yet isn't asking, or at least in the annual report, the projects reported aren't asking the tough questions, whereas China Star is beginning to get to that bleeding edge. And I'm really fascinated also then with this role of this JDI-HKC collaboration as to whether or not that can ask some of the really difficult questions too. Anyway, have a good day.